Alright everyone, today's unit of choice is no stranger to the battlefield, provided that he's not running away from it. Standing at over 10 feet tall and crumping with his homies, this literal bucket of bolts represents the pinnacle of a Lilligrot's career path. That's right everyone, today's model makeover is the infamous Killa can. By the time we're done giving this guy an upgrade, you'll be calling the old versions Killa cans. That's stupid. Without further ado, let's get to building. So to get this project started, we've been provided with some bits just to kind of form a basis for this overall model. Most importantly, I think it's going to be the water tower that goes on the shoulder of the Stampa model. That's going to act as our torso for this. And as you can see, it's a little bit bigger than the normal can model. Now I've also done some prep work up here in the upper left-hand corner. I actually used my silhouette cutter to just get an outline of some of these shapes I needed to cut out. Now, this doesn't go all the way through the styrene, but it does do a good job of getting through enough to where you don't have to cut too hard and you can get some pretty precise cuts out of it. Now, my first task here is going to be to add this piece I cut out that's just going to fit right along the upper rim of the water tower. Now, this is going to hang over the edge just a little bit, but it's just enough to provide a contact point for adding some green stuff later on, which is really just going to allow us to beef this model up a little bit. Overall, I'm picturing something along the lines of a can with Death Dread Envy, so he's going to have a lot more mass, but we're also going to make him look a little bit different, something we've never seen before. So I'm not going to make it a perfectly enclosed cylinder. I actually want to have a swiveling head inside that's essentially able to move wherever the grot needs to see. So one of the other items I'm going to work on here is a jaw piece that goes in the front, and I want this to be modular. So I want to be able to pull it out, put it back in anytime I need to go back and make adjustments to the head. That way I can change where he's looking just for posing, but also for painting purposes. If I can create this and have it to where it fits in there snug and comes in and out, it'll be a lot easier to get in there and paint in some of those nooks and crannies whenever I get to that. So far it's lining up pretty well. I am going to wind up altering this a little bit as I go, but now I'm going to work on the actual shoulder connectors for the model. So I'm just trying to get these tubes lined out so that they have enough of a contact point to fit on the cylindrical back end of the water tower. So I use my Dremel a little bit to cut those down, create that curvature, and I'm just going to stick them on there. I don't need them to look pretty. We're going to wind up just going back over them with green stuff to fill in the gaps anyways. So all I'm really trying to do here is just kind of build a form for the model, and then we'll go back and add details later. Whenever I'm building something like this though, I tend to think of form and functionality. Is this something that would look the part, and is it something that looks like it would actually work? I know that's kind of counterintuitive for orcs, but at the same time, especially in GW's newer line of models, they've really shown that orcs kind of have their own fabrication methods and are able to make some pretty complex machinery, so I want that to show through in this model. So as we move along here, just a fun little fact, this is actually all shot in real time. There's no movie magic or editing going on here. Just had a lot of coffee and decided to get to work, so this is me all the way. So what we're coming up on here is the addition of the engine that we're going to add to the model. Now, I didn't want to go with the traditional kind of motor spewing out gas, and I know that that is heresy for orcs. However, because I want this guy to stand out and be different, I thought it would be cool to add on sort of a reactor. Now, I don't want to lose out on all of those little intricacies that are always shown with the motors, so I'm going to try to make this thing as complex looking as possible just to make sure to do this guy some justice. I also think about things like, well, what if orcs needed to operate in space and there's no air out there? How's a motor going to work? I guess they could just wish air into existence through their belief system and how their psychic powers work and all that, but maybe it just doesn't work in this case. So anyway, I'm working on some green stuff right now. I am very new to green stuff. I think I've used it in a couple projects in the past, but I recently got some new tools online and they have actually made it a lot easier. These are rubber tipped, just little sculpting tools, and they tend to work a lot better and give you some smoothed out edges when you're working with it. I'm sure I'll learn how to use them a little bit better as we go, but so far it seems like it's working pretty well. So quick note, I am using the Testors liquid cement for the plastic pieces. It works really well and gives a lot more strength to the model. Once we move over to green stuff, I'll wind up using my super glue, but I almost exclusively use the Testors just because I like how strong it winds up bonding for the overall integrity of the model. So one piece that I'm actually working on now is just a little strip of styrene that I'm going to add to the model, just right to the very top rim there. And I'm just going to put it on its edge and create a little rim. You can kind of see on here, it's not a huge addition, but I think it does help with any kind of model like this, especially if you're doing a tank or anything. It's just a little extra detail that kind of goes a long way in adding to the realism. Now you may notice as we go along that I am doing green stuff work on the same pieces over and over, and that really boils down to me and my inexperience with it. What I've been kind of doing here is just adding little bits and then letting it dry and then going back and adding more so that I don't screw up what I just added on there. Over time I feel like I'll be able to just do it all in one go, but for now I just want to make sure I don't leave a giant thumbprint as we go along. So with our tubes in the back, we've got some pretty big gaps where the contact points didn't quite connect, so I'm just using some green stuff to fill in those gaps, and really all I'm doing is some basic shapes just to create the effect that everything looks like it should be in place. So just adding things that look like little couplings or just kind of metal rims to make everything fall in line. All right, so here's what we've got so far. We've gotten some green stuff work done. I have not gotten the hinge on the left side of the jaw, but we did manage to get everything in place to make this modular and be able to swivel the head around in there. So I also put a little face on there just so we could get a perspective of where he's looking. And then again, the green stuff work on the side, just pretty basic shapes, make it look like everything fits in there. And then we'll add bits and additional detail in there later on. And then the bottom piece we just saw there is the little skirt that we'll use to act as a transition point between the torso and the legs. So for the actual cockpit, I was a little bit torn here because I wanted to add this just skull face painted on there. I thought it'd give a really neat look, but from the functionality perspective, we need to add some kind of ocular lens, and I thought it would translate a little bit better if we had a face just kind of bolted on there. So I'm gonna make this look as kind of scrappy as possible, stick with our aesthetic and just make it look like random pieces of metal bolted on to make a face. So one thing I did want to add was a nose to represent the grots piloting this thing. I thought I'd add a little bit of extra character, and overall, once we're done with it, it's just going to look like a giant spike that's been rammed into the face. So at this point, I'm digging into the bits box, and I grabbed a motor piece from one of the orc trucks. I'm just gluing that on there. I'm going to let it dry real quick and come back to it. But again, like I said, I'm just kind of going doing some green stuff work here and there, adding a little bit more to the jaw, and then we're going to come back to the backpack there and actually start adding more to even that out. Now with the face, I actually decided that I did not like the lens I chose because it was way too big. So I cut off another one from the same piece and decided to go with that instead. I think it worked out a little bit better. It's not that much smaller, but just enough to kind of fit. So now we're moving on to the arm, and I kind of decided what I wanted to do with the pose here. I want him to have a just awesome Mega Blaster shock attack gun combo going on, and I want him to be in a pose to where he is kind of standing there with his arm out getting ready to shoot something. So with that, we're gonna have to alter the arm a little bit. So I've just added some card in there to keep it in place, and then we're gonna go back and cover it all up later and make it look like it's actually bending out a little bit more than it normally does. And while that's drying, I'm just building a little piece for the legs. This was originally going to be held on by a couple of pistons, kind of a see-through torso effect, but I decided in the end that he was already getting a little bit tall and it wouldn't necessarily work out with the size that the legs are. Now at this point in the video, you might start to notice that some improvements have been done that were not shown previously, and that is because my video file is corrupted. So apologies for that. We managed to get a shoulder piece made out of some styrene, and we got kind of a basis for our Mega Blaster built out. So since I'm a fan of no bit left behind, I actually used the other half of the water tower here to create the other shoulder. I wound up just cutting it right in half, and it was a perfect diameter. There's very little modification needed there. So I wasn't entirely sure about the pose here and wound up spending couple of hours waiting for green stuff to dry just so I could make sure that I could undo the pose if I needed to later. In retrospect, it would have made more sense just to pin it, but hey, it happened. So I wound up basing him on just some random styrene I had laying around and used my heat gun to warp it a little bit to kind of give that impact of him just coming full sprint, just crushing anything in his path. So we'll wind up modifying his other leg to be extended out a little more just to help further the idea of him running full sprint. But for now, I'm really just more in detail mode. I don't want to add that leg just so I can get around and sculpt green stuff if I need to. Probably should have done that with the shoulders because it has been a little bit difficult to get into some of those nooks and crannies. But overall, it just counts as a happy little accident to file away for future builds, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. So now we're just going to add little detail work as we go. We've gotten the majority of the form down for this model. So I'm going to start working on little tubes and rivets and just kind of adding extra bits here and there. So we're getting pretty close to our stopping point. And I have to say that I am pretty pleased with where we are on the model so far. It's been an absolute blast to work on this one. And I look forward to finishing this guy up and getting him painted for you all to see. So let us know what you guys think in the comments. And let us know what kind of ideas you have for future builds. If you haven't already, jump on the Patreon channel. We'd love to hear what kind of ideas you have. Thank you for checking out our video. This is Jordan with White Metal Games, and until next time, happy scratch building.